You know, for someone who's spent their life avoiding deep emotions, love can feel like a threat. They've built walls, not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. But here's the truth. The moment an avoidant finally realizes they love you, everything begins to shift. At first, it feels terrifying. Their old identity is built on self-protection, on keeping distance. But love demands presence. Love requires courage. And when they awaken to that love, they discover something incredible. What they feared the most is actually the very thing their soul was craving. See, avoidance is just fear disguised as independence. But love reveals that true strength isn't in running, it's in showing up. When an avoidant finally leans in, they begin to see vulnerability not as weakness, but as the ultimate form of power. Because it takes more courage to open your heart than to close it. And here's the breakthrough when they choose love. They're not just transforming their relationship, they're transforming themselves. They're healing old wounds, rewriting the story of their life, and creating a new possibility. A possibility of trust, intimacy, and authentic connection. Awareness awakens connection, and this single truth has the power to transform an entire relationship and a person's inner world. For someone who identifies as avoidant, their life has often been built on layers of defense protection and a belief that they must keep their heart safe at all costs. They move through life creating distance because closeness feels overwhelming, unpredictable, and dangerous. It isn't that they don't feel emotions. They feel them deeply. But emotions have often been linked with pain, disappointment, or rejection. So their mind builds a story, stay safe by staying separate. But then something shifts. Love enters. And not the kind of love that can be ignored or brushed aside, but the kind of love that slowly, persistently, and unshakably calls them forward. Awareness is the moment the fog begins to lift. It's that instant when the avoidant can no longer deny what their heart has been whispering. At first, it can feel uncomfortable, even terrifying, because with awareness comes responsibility. Once they know they love you, they can't simply retreat into the old narrative without some inner conflict. That's the power of awareness. It forces them to face truth, and truth is always the beginning of transformation. When this awareness takes root, something beautiful happens. Connection begins to awaken within them. It's not that they suddenly become a completely open book or that all fear vanishes. No, it's more subtle, more profound. They start noticing how deeply they care, how much your presence matters, how life feels different when you are near. What was once an intellectual denial begins to crumble because awareness doesn't let them hide. That connection they've avoided becomes undeniable, and for the first time, they see love not as a threat, but as a source of life. This awareness is educational in the deepest sense because it teaches them that their old way of surviving is not the only way to live. They realize that the walls that once felt like protection have also been a prison. Love brings them the lesson that while avoiding might have kept pain out, it has also kept joy, intimacy, and belonging away. Awareness is like the light switch. Suddenly the room is illuminated, and they see not just you, but themselves in a way they never have before. Think of awareness as the beginning of a new dialogue within them. A voice begins to speak. If I feel this love, maybe I am capable of it. If I long for this connection, maybe connection is what I was created for. And with that, the story starts to shift. It's not an overnight transformation. Awareness doesn't erase fear, but it changes the trajectory. Instead of running from closeness, they start questioning their old pattern. Instead of assuming love will lead to loss, they consider the possibility that love could lead to growth, healing, and fulfillment. This process is profound because awareness doesn't just awaken connection with you. It awakens connection within themselves. For perhaps the first time, they recognize their own capacity to love and be loved. They realize that vulnerability, though frightening, is also the doorway to everything they've secretly craved: intimacy, partnership, meaning. Awareness shows them that the risk of love is far smaller than the cost of a lonely life lived behind walls. So when awareness awakens connection, it is the moment where the inner battle shifts. Fear may still be loud, but now love has a voice too. And the more they listen to that voice, the stronger it grows. They start to lean in, to test the waters, to risk a little more. They may stumble, they may resist, but the seed has been planted. They know now that they love you, and that truth cannot be undone. That truth is what pushes them to grow. Awareness is always the first step of transformation. It doesn't solve everything, but it opens the door. And once an avoidant steps into that awareness, they begin a journey where love is no longer something to run from, but something to embrace. Awareness awakens connection, and connection awakens life. Fear meets vulnerability, and in that collision lies one of the greatest human turning points. For the avoidant, fear has always been the compass. Fear says, stay away, don't get too close, don't let anyone in. Fear creates the illusion of safety by building barriers so high that no one can cross them. Vulnerability, on the other hand, is the exact opposite force. Vulnerability says, open up, let yourself be seen, take the risk. For someone who has spent their life leaning on avoidance as a shield, vulnerability feels unbearable, like standing exposed in a storm with no protection. Yet when love enters the picture, fear and vulnerability are forced to meet face to face, and something extraordinary begins to unfold. Fear whispers that if they show their true self, they'll be rejected or abandoned. Fear reminds them of old pain of times they reached out and got hurt. But vulnerability offers a different message. Connection is only possible if you allow yourself to be seen. This tension creates a powerful moment of choice. They can continue listening to fear, or they can lean into vulnerability. And though it feels like stepping off a cliff, vulnerability is the bridge that transforms love from an idea into a lived reality. When an avoidant finally realizes they love you, the awareness of that love makes hiding impossible. Fear rises up stronger than ever because love demands more than distance. It demands presence. Vulnerability becomes the price of admission for real intimacy. They may resist it at first, clinging to old habits, but the more they try to deny what they feel, the heavier the inner conflict becomes. And then comes the breakthrough. They start to see that fear and vulnerability are not enemies, but partners. Vulnerability doesn't erase fear, it gives fear a new purpose. It says, you're scared, but you can still choose to show up. This is where growth happens. When fear collides with vulnerability, it becomes clear that real strength isn't in hiding. It's in being willing to be known. It's in showing the parts of themselves they once believed were unworthy. It's in taking the risk of being hurt, because love is worth that risk. Fear will always have a voice, but when vulnerability is embraced, love gets louder. And in that space, healing begins. Think about it, the very thing the avoidant once believed would break them: exposure, closeness, emotional honesty. Turns out to be the thing that makes them whole. Vulnerability becomes the classroom where they learn that imperfection doesn't push love away, it deepens it. Fear told them to run, but vulnerability teaches them to stay, and staying in the presence of fear is the highest form of courage. For the first time, they discover that opening up doesn't equal losing control. It equals gaining connection. They learn that admitting, I'm scared, or I don't know how to do this, can actually draw two people closer, not further apart. Fear meets vulnerability, and instead of destruction, the meeting creates transformation. This is the moment when the avoidant begins to rewrite their story. They no longer have to live as someone running from intimacy. They can become someone who chooses it even in the presence of fear. This process is not about perfection. They will still stumble, still retreat at times, still wrestle with the old urge to escape. But once vulnerability enters the picture, they can never fully return to the old way of living. They've tasted the possibility of being seen and accepted, and that taste is unforgettable. Fear may still whisper its warnings, but now there is another voice reminding them of the truth. That love grows only where vulnerability is allowed to breathe. So when fear meets vulnerability, it marks the beginning of a new chapter. It is not the end of fear. It is the transformation of it. Fear becomes fuel for courage. Vulnerability becomes the pathway to intimacy. And in this collision, the avoidant discovers that love doesn't destroy them. It builds them into someone stronger, freer, and more alive than they ever imagined. The power of surrender is one of the greatest lessons an avoidant will ever encounter, because for them, surrender has always felt like weakness, loss of control, or danger. Their entire protective system has been built on holding on tightly, holding on to independence, holding on to distance, holding on to safety through control. But when love becomes undeniable, when their heart finally awakens to the truth of what they feel, the only path forward is surrender. And this surrender is not about giving up. It is about letting go of the need to fight against what is natural. It is about finally allowing themselves to flow with love instead of resisting it. In the beginning, the thought of surrender feels impossible. The avoidant has told themselves that relying on someone else or letting someone in is a threat to their survival. They have convinced themselves that they can only be safe when they are in charge of every outcome. But love is not built on control, it is built on trust. And trust requires surrender. This is why the process feels so radical. It is like asking them to lay down their shield in the middle of a battlefield. Every instinct screams against it, but deep down they begin to sense that surrender is not defeat. It is the gateway to freedom. When they finally allow themselves to surrender, a new reality emerges. They begin to see that surrender is not about losing independence, but about gaining connection. It is about realizing that love does not take away their strength, it multiplies it. Surrender allows them to experience the fullness of life instead of living in a half state where emotions are muted and connections are shallow. Through surrender, they taste a richness they never knew was possible. The warmth of closeness, the safety of being understood, the joy of shared moments that cannot exist behind walls. The power of surrender also lies in the release of old stories. For so long, they have told themselves that love is dangerous, that intimacy equals pain, that letting go equals getting hurt. These stories have defined their identity and shaped their behavior. But surrender allows a new story to be written. It says, yes, there is risk in love, but there is also reward. Yes, I might be hurt, but I might also be healed. Yes, I feel fear, but I choose to trust anyway. That act of surrender is transformative because it replaces an old narrative of fear with a new narrative of courage. Surrender is not about losing boundaries or abandoning the self. It is about opening the heart without abandoning the mind. It is a conscious choice to allow love to enter fully, knowing it may not be perfect, but believing it is worth it. For the avoidant, this choice is life-altering. They realize that clinging to control has never protected them from pain. It has only kept them from love. Surrender is the moment they release that illusion and embrace reality, the reality that love requires openness, and openness requires trust. The beauty of surrender is that it changes not only their relationship with you, but also their relationship with themselves. When they surrender to love, they surrender to the parts of themselves they once rejected, the need for connection, the longing for closeness, the desire to be cared for. They stop fighting against their humanity and start embracing it. This is where true transformation happens. They discover that surrendering to love does not make them weaker. It makes them more whole, more grounded, more alive. And perhaps the most powerful part of surrender is that it creates a new form of strength. A strength not built on avoidance or denial, but on openness and trust. It takes far more courage to surrender than to resist. Resistance is easy. It is the automatic reflex of fear. Surrender is the conscious act of choosing love despite fear. That choice creates a depth of connection that nothing else can. So when the avoidant finally surrenders, it is not a moment of loss. It is a moment of liberation. It is the point where they realize that in giving up the need to control, they gain the ability to fully experience love. The power of surrender lies in this paradox. The moment they let go, they finally win. They win freedom from fear, freedom from isolation, and freedom to love and be loved without conditions. That is the true strength of surrender, and it changes everything. Courage to show up is one of the most vital shifts that happens when an avoidant finally accepts the truth of their love. For much of their life, they have been present in body but absent in heart. They might participate in relationships, conversations, and even commitments, but there is always a distance, a subtle withdrawal that protects them from being fully seen. To truly show up requires something far deeper than physical presence. It demands emotional availability, honesty, and vulnerability. And for the avoidant, this step is monumental because it is the first time they dare to step into love without armor. Showing up means more than just staying in the room. It means being engaged, invested, and willing to risk connection. It means they stop hiding behind excuses, distractions, or the fast aid of indifference. It means they start looking you in the eyes and letting you see what they really feel. This is not easy for them because every instinct pushes them toward retreat. Yet courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of it. And for someone who has always run from closeness, showing up becomes the bravest choice they can make. When they choose to show up, they begin to rewrite the script of their life. Instead of disappearing when things get difficult, they lean in. Instead of shutting down when emotions feel overwhelming, they open a little more. Instead of leaving when intimacy feels risky, they choose to stay. This decision transforms not only the relationship, but also their sense of self. For the first time, they see themselves as capable of love, capable of connection, capable of building something meaningful. Showing up becomes evidence that they are stronger than the fear that once controlled them. The courage to show up also creates a ripple effect. It communicates to you, their partner, that you matter enough for them to fight their old patterns. It sends the message that love is worth the risk and that you are worth the effort. And that is profoundly healing, both for them and for you. Because showing up is not just about grand gestures. It is about the daily choice to be present, to listen, to engage, to stay consistent. It is in the little moments where they once would have withdrawn, but now they remain. These small acts of presence build trust, and trust deepens love. Courage is tested most in the moments of conflict or discomfort. For the avoidant, these moments used to be exit points. Times to detach, shut down, or disappear emotionally. But showing up means staying through the storm. It means having the hard conversations instead of avoiding them. It means admitting I'm scared or I don't know how to do this and still choosing to stand there with you. That is true bravery because it demands that they face not only their fear of you, but also their fear of themselves. In those moments, they prove to themselves that they can endure emotional intensity without collapsing or running away. What makes showing up so transformative is that it builds a foundation for lasting connection. Love cannot thrive on absence. Love grows only where there is consistency, honesty, and presence. By showing up, the avoidant steps out of the shadows of fear and into the light of love. They begin to understand that presence is the greatest gift they can give, far more valuable than perfection. Love doesn't require them to be flawless. It requires them to be available, to be real, to be engaged. The courage to show up is not about one grand breakthrough, but about a series of daily decisions. Each day they choose to answer the call of connection instead of the urge to retreat. Each time they share a thought, express a feeling, or allow themselves to be seen, they strengthen the bond slowly. They realize that showing up does not lead to the rejection they once feared, but to the closeness they have secretly longed for. With every act of courage, the walls come down a little more, and love flows more freely. Ultimately, the courage to show up reveals to them that love is not about control or safety. It is about presence. It is about being there fully even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is scary, even when it feels like too much. And in choosing to show up, they discover that the very thing they feared, the risk of intimacy, is also the source of their greatest strength and deepest joy. For the avoidant, this is the moment where transformation becomes real. When they stop hiding and start living not halfway, but wholeheartedly. Healing through connection is a profound and transformative process, especially for someone who has lived much of their life avoiding emotional closeness. For the avoidant, the world has often been experienced as a place where connection equals vulnerability and vulnerability equals pain. As a result, they have built walls, cultivated independence, and created distance, not out of a lack of feeling, but out of a deep desire to protect themselves from the risks of intimacy. Yet when they finally realize they love someone, they begin to discover that connection is not something to fear, it is a source of profound healing. Connection allows the avoidant to experience life in a new and expansive way. For years, they may have felt fragmented, as though a part of themselves was always missing or hidden. Through authentic connection, they begin to integrate those parts. By engaging deeply with someone they love, they are invited to see themselves through another's eyes, to recognize their worth, and to feel the reassurance that they are not alone. This external validation is only part of the process. The real power of healing comes from learning to trust that connection itself is safe. That intimacy does not automatically lead to rejection, and that being seen does not mean being diminished. When they allow themselves to be present, fully and vulnerably, in a loving relationship, old patterns of avoidance slowly begin to dissolve. Each moment of honest interaction, each shared laugh, each expression of support and understanding chips away at the fear that once dominated their heart. Connection becomes the teacher, showing them that their fears were not inherently true. They were just habits of avoidance reinforced over time. The more they engage in connection, the more they learn that the human experience is not meant to be endured alone, but to be shared, felt, and celebrated together. Healing through connection is not linear. The avoiding will inevitably encounter moments of doubt, discomfort, or old habits resurfacing. They may feel the impulse to withdraw or protect themselves, and at first, these impulses can feel overwhelming. But each choice to lean in rather than pull away strengthens their capacity for intimacy. Every act of openness, however small, becomes a building block of resilience. They learn that connection is not something fragile that must be avoided. It is a living, breathing source of support that can hold them even when life feels uncertain or scary. This process also teaches profound lessons about empathy and reciprocity. By connecting with someone deeply, the avoidant begins to understand not only their own needs and fears, but also the needs, emotions, and vulnerabilities of another. They realize that love is a two-way street, that connection is built on mutual presence and understanding, and that true intimacy is an exchange, not a risk of one-sided exposure. This realization allows them to step beyond the walls of self-protection and experience the joy of shared life. Through connection, they also confront and heal past wounds. Old rejections, betrayals, and disappointments may resurface, but in the presence of a secure and loving partner, these wounds begin to lose their power. Connection provides the safe environment in which they can process, release, and transform pain into wisdom. They come to understand that past hurts do not define their present or dictate their future. Instead, connection offers a living demonstration that love can be gentle, supportive, and restorative. Healing through connection ultimately changes their relationship with themselves. They discover that their worth is not tied to isolation or self-sufficiency, but to their capacity to engage, to feel, and to be seen. They learn that vulnerability is not weakness, but a vital ingredient in growth and fulfillment. The avoidant begins to integrate their heart and mind, their desire for independence, and their longing for closeness into a balanced and authentic self. Connection becomes the medium through which they reclaim their wholeness, transforming old fears into newfound strength. The beauty of this transformation is that it is self-reinforcing. The more they connect, the more they heal. The more they heal, the more capable they become of deeper connection. Love becomes a feedback loop of growth, teaching them that intimacy, far from being dangerous, is a pathway to empowerment. The avoidant discovers that the very thing they once ran from, the closeness and emotional presence of another, is the catalyst for their own emotional liberation. Ultimately, healing through connection is a journey from fear to freedom. It is the moment where the avoidant realizes that love is not a trap, but a sanctuary. Each shared moment, each act of vulnerability, each choice to remain present in the face of discomfort becomes proof that true intimacy heals old wounds, strengthens the heart, and nurtures the soul. Connection teaches them that love is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced, and through that embrace, they find the power to become fully alive, fully human, and fully capable of giving and receiving love without reservation. Commitment creates freedom, and this is one of the most profound truths an avoidant discovers when they finally embrace love. For much of their life, avoidance has been the illusion of freedom, the belief that by keeping distance, staying independent, and avoiding emotional risk, they are protecting themselves and preserving their autonomy. They may have equated commitment with confinement, believing that attachment would limit their choices, restrict their movement, or trap them in vulnerability. Yet when they truly realize they love someone, they come to understand that real freedom is not the absence of attachment, but the presence of trust, responsibility, and consistent choice. Commitment is the deliberate act of saying, I choose this person, I choose this relationship, I choose to be present, even when it is challenging. For the avoidant, this is transformative because it shifts their perspective from fear-based avoidance to purpose-driven connection. By choosing to commit, they stop running from intimacy and start participating in it consciously. They realize that freedom is not about fleeing the world, but about engaging fully with the world and with the person they love. In commitment, they find the space to grow, explore, and express themselves authentically without the constant pressure to guard or defend their heart. When an avoidant commits, something remarkable happens internally. The walls that once seemed necessary for survival begin to soften, not because they have lost strength, but because they have gained trust. Commitment provides a container in which love can flourish safely. It gives them a structure, a reliable framework that allows them to explore vulnerability without fear of chaos or abandonment. They learn that true freedom exists not in isolation, but in the ability to choose connection repeatedly, consistently, and wholeheartedly. This choice transforms their relationship and their sense of self, showing them that freedom is not escaping responsibility, it is embracing it. Commitment also teaches patience, consistency, and perseverance. The avoidant realizes that love is not a fleeting emotion or a temporary convenience. It is a conscious effort, a daily choice to nurture, protect, and invest in someone else while also honoring oneself. Through this process, they discover that freedom does not mean impulsive independence or the avoidance of discomfort. Rather, freedom comes from the stability that commitment provides. It allows them to explore their emotions fully, to experience deep connection without panic, and to grow in ways that were previously impossible behind walls of avoidance. Another aspect of freedom through commitment is the opportunity for self-mastery. The avoidant begins to notice patterns of fear, withdrawal, or defensiveness and consciously works to respond differently. They learn that freedom is not the absence of boundaries or the ability to escape consequences, but the ability to act intentionally, to engage authentically, and to sustain love in the face of challenges. Commitment becomes a mirror reflecting their growth. Each choice to remain present strengthens emotional resilience, builds trust, and deepens their capacity to love without reservation. The paradox of commitment is that by giving themselves fully to another, the avoidant discovers a new form of autonomy. They are no longer bound by the old scripts of fear, avoidance, or self-protection. Instead, they operate from choice, awareness, and conscious presence. This freedom is liberating because it is rooted in self-responsibility rather than fear. By committing to love, they break free from the patterns that once trapped them in isolation, insecurity, and emotional stagnation. They realize that real independence does not come from distance. It comes from the strength to remain present, to face discomfort, and to honor connection. Commitment also amplifies trust, both in themselves and in the relationship. By choosing to stay even when fear or doubt arises, they reinforce the understanding that love is reliable, sustainable, and reciprocal. This trust creates emotional safety, which is the foundation for freedom. The avoidant learns that freedom without trust is an illusion, but freedom within a committed, loving framework allows them to fully experience life, joy, intimacy, and personal growth. They are free to explore their emotions, pursue shared goals, and express themselves without fear of losing themselves or being abandoned. Ultimately, commitment creates freedom because it transforms avoidance into presence, fear into courage, and distance into intimacy. The avoidant discovers that freedom is not about escaping attachment or shielding the heart. It is about choosing love every day, embracing vulnerability, and engaging fully in the life they are building with someone they care about deeply. In this conscious commitment, they find liberation, the freedom to love authentically, to grow without limitation, and to live a life unburdened by the walls of fear that once constrained them. This is the ultimate lesson. Freedom is not fleeing from love. It is choosing it consistently, courageously, and wholeheartedly.